All right, it's time for another one of them critique episodes where I read an article in the literature and critique it. And today's article is Unraveling the Interplay of Circadian Rhythm and Sleep Deprivation on Mood, a real-world study on first-year physicians. And I haven't read the article yet, so I'm going to start reading that and then, give you my insights as they come. Okay, so I just finished the introduction, and I got a good idea of what the study's about. So basically, it's got a bunch of first-year medical students who are wearing Fitbits and iPhones and that sort of thing, and much of the data is tracked automatically through like their iPhone, like a step counter and what times they're awake, what times they're asleep, that sort of thing. And so what it's trying to do is it's trying to assess the effect of working contrary to their circadian rhythms on their mood, because also at a random point during the day, it would ask them, like, how is your mood today on a scale of 1 to 10? So yeah, that's what it's about. I'm going to keep reading. And back. Okay, so I read the paper, and overall, not terrible. Or there's nothing in the paper that makes me think there's serious problems with this. There are certainly things that I think are a little strange, and I wouldn't have done them, but nothing that threatens the validity of their conclusions, I think. So first comment is they've got a huge sample size, and that's a good thing. By the way, I remember receiving a critique once on a paper where somebody criticized my large sample size. What? Since when is a large sample size a problem? And I think their reasoning was, well, at that sample size, anything is statistically significant. I'm like, yeah, and that might be a problem if I were relying on statistical significance, but I'm not. I'm relying on effect sizes and plots. So yeah, the fact that you have a large sample size is actually a good thing. Same goes for this paper. Now let me break from what I was saying to just say that there are several things that I could comment on that I'm not going to spend much time commenting on. I'm just going to comment on the things that I find the most illustrative. So like, for example, they have a bunch of missing data. Even though my dissertation was on missing data, I usually have no interest in commenting on missing data, but that could be a problem. Next critique. But actually, this is not a critique so much as like a kudos. This study is unusually high in ecological validity. And what ecological validity means is that it mimics conditions in the real world. So it's not like this is a bunch of undergraduate psychology students in a research lab. This is actual medical interns that are exhausted and living very chaotic lives. Real schedules, real stress, real sleep deprivation. Now you do lose some internal validity, but I think for this paper, it's worth it. Who cares? We've got really high external validity. That's awesome. Now, next point is that their measure of mood is really simplified. So basically they had one item that asked, how is your mood today on a scale of 1 to 10? And that's a pretty crude measure. I think I would lose some legitimacy as a quantitative psychologist if I didn't comment on that. You should probably have a better measure of mood, but hey, we'll go with it. Why not? It's going to have unreliability, which is going to get consumed within the error term because it's the outcome variable, so we'll roll with it. Next critique, which is another compliment, is that they actually wrote out their mixed models. For some reason, I get asked to review mixed models quite a bit, and almost every time I review a paper that uses mixed models, they say, hey, we use mixed models. Okay, what kind of mixed models? Well, this was our outcome and these were our predictors. Great. Which effects were fixed and which were random? And most people don't actually tell you. And I think most people just default to a random intercepts model and they fix the slopes. And rarely do they justify that decision. So this one actually told us exactly what parameters were fixed and which were random. Which also leads to another critique, and I don't want to overshadow the compliment that I gave for them. It's great that they put out there exactly what their model is. Fantastic. And I also recognize that opens you up for critique, which I'm going to do. My critique is that they didn't have any of the slopes be random. So you are assuming that every single med student has the exact same sinusoidal curvature, the exact same slope, all that thing. The only thing that differs is their average mood. That's a very strong assumption to make, and I don't think it would probably be justified if you actually fit the model. And another bit of praise. I have never seen anybody do this, and I think it's brilliant. what they did was they included a model that looked like this. Notice we have sine and cosine in there. So basically they're building a linear model from a nonlinear function, which I do all the time when I'm using like regular linear models where I will include a polynomial to introduce curvature. Well, this is another way of introducing curvature by adding these sine and cosine terms. And you can actually see that from the plots that we get this kind of sinusoidal curvature going on. So I think that's super cool that they did that. But there's another advantage to doing that sine and cosine thing. See, the problem is they got this circadian rhythm number that goes from 0 to 360 degrees. Problem is, 0 is the exact same value as 360 degrees. It's the exact same point in somebody's circadian rhythm. Or in other words, if you treated it as linear, 0 degrees would be 359 points away from 360 degrees, even though they are the exact same value. So the model should be treating 359 and 0 as neighbors. And if we used a regular linear model, that wouldn't work. But what they have done is they have used the sine and cosine functions to turn each of those angles into a coordinate on a unit circle, kind of like in this table. So now we see that 0 degrees and 360 degrees map onto the same coordinates. Or another way of thinking about it is instead of asking like in a regular linear model, where is your score on the line? You're instead asking, where is your score on the circle? So like I said, I have never seen that before, and I think it is bloody brilliant. Love it. So keep up the good work. And by the way, let me step back and talk about the circadian rhythm. So they somehow use some existing literature to convert somebody's heart rate and the time between their last heart rate measurement to identify where they are at in that 360 degree circadian rhythm. I did not read that fully enough because that was kind of outside the scope of what I wanted to do with this paper, but it sounds like a cool idea. And it sounds like pretty brilliant of whoever they quoted in their article to figure out a way to convert somebody's heart rate and time into a circadian rhythm. That's cool. Makes me want to compute my own circadian rhythm. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some of the figures. So there's this figure, and it took me a very long time to try to figure out what this middle figure specifically is trying to tell us. And one of the reasons it took me so long is because when you read it in the text, in the actual manuscript, it doesn't say anything about that figure. You had to read the figure caption to figure out what's going on. So basically, and I still have trouble thinking about it. Oh yeah, the second one is basically trying to figure out at what time of day on average, or on median technically, people were completing the mood survey. And I guess they're just looking at that and charting it against their circadian rhythm phase. So the fact that I'm still confused and I do this thing for a living kind of suggests to me that this needs to be more fully explained. Now on to my biggest critiques. One of them is that they end up binning continuous variables. Now let me make a distinction, and it's not entirely clear to me what the authors did. But if you are trying to visualize three variables against one another, like they did in this plot, it's really hard to keep that third variable, in this case, how long they've been awake. It's really hard to keep that continuous while plotting. Like you could do a three-dimensional plot, and as long as you can rotate it, you can kind of see what's going on, but those are actually really hard to interpret. So I like binning for the purpose of plotting, as they have done in this. But I think they also binned for the actual analysis. And I don't think that's a good idea. And I've said this many, many times on my channel, that if you have continuous data, analyze it as continuous data. Don't discretize it or don't bin it, because you're just throwing away information. You might miss some super important insights. And in the end, you're just introducing unreliability in your model, which you don't want. So yeah, don't bin. But again, I don't know if that's what they did. I think they did for the analysis and for the plotting. So that's not something that I would recommend doing. Instead, keep all continuous variables as continuous variables. Okay, another big critique, and this is probably my biggest critique of the study, is that, and actually I'm going to read it. They said, to help understand the nonlinear relationship of time awake and circadian phase on mood, survey scores were broken into 4 strata. Strata were set at less than 6 hours, 6 to 12 hours, 12 to 18 hours, and 18 to 24 hours of time awake. Each stratum was then fit with its own model. However, now without the fixed effect of time awake. And I had to read that several times to figure out what they were trying to say. So the thing that threw me off the most is they said, to help us understand the nonlinear relationship of time awake and circadian phase on mood. So I'm primed to think, okay, they're going to come up with some fancy method to try to figure out any sort of nonlinearities in this relationship. And then they break it down into 4 strata and then run 4 separate models. And it took me a long time to figure out how in the world that could help you assess nonlinearity. And I think their rationale was, all right, we're going to fit one model for those times when it was 1 to 6 hours. And then we're going to fit another model for 6 to 12 hours that they've been awake. And if those results are different, that tells you that the relationship between circadian rhythm and mood depends on how long they've been awake. So basically, they're looking for an interaction effect, which is a nonlinear relationship. But this is a very awkward way of doing it, that you're fitting 4 separate models. And the problem is these 4 separate models aren't communicating with one another. Despite the fact that they share the same participants, they share the same variables, they share everything. They're part of the same data set, and yet you're treating them as if they are 4 independent data sets, when they're not. So it's extremely inefficient statistically. And it's really not modeling nonlinearity directly. Like if you want to assess nonlinearity, assess nonlinearity. Keep time awake as a predictor variable and then plot that just as they did in the plot. And actually, let me look at that plot again. Okay, there's the plot. And actually, we do see that there's an interaction effect going on there. So we see from 0 to 6 hours, there's very little bendiness in the curves. But the longer they've been awake, the more wildly their mood swings across the circadian rhythms, which actually makes sense. But the way they've done that is they've fit 4 separate models, which you don't need to do that. You can basically produce this exact same plot, but keep the hours awake as a continuous variable, and then you can test this directly and get precise statistical estimates instead of weird approximations that are off. And the other problem that I have with this is that notice that it's highly concentrated in plots A, B, and C, and then hardly any values in plot D. And so because they chose these arbitrary 6-hour cutoff points, you end up getting very different sample sizes, which kind of increases the arbitrariness of it, because that plot D is the least precise of the 3. And if you actually read the text of their conclusions, that's kind of one of the results that they hang their hat on. They're like, hey, look, it was statistically significant in these other ones, but not in this last one. Therefore, the effect is different. Well, maybe it's only different because you have such a small sample size. So again, what I would do is I would just predict the outcome variable, subjective mood, based on the sine and the cosine of circadian phases, as well as hours awake, as well as the interaction effect between those two. And you could evaluate that directly. So again, this is like the biggest problem that I had. And I don't think it's a fatal flaw. I think it's just inefficient. I think if I were to run the same model, which I might do that if you guys want me to do that, they provided their data, so I might as well. But chances are when I run the model the way that I would do it versus the way that they did it, our conclusions probably are going to be very similar. So there's lots of different options besides this arbitrary stratification. And my final critique of this, and this is one of those situations that I don't know how valid this critique is. It just struck me as unusual and different from what I do. And let me see if I can articulate why I think this might be a problem. So I'll tell you what they did. They fit a full and reduced model. They didn't use the terms full and reduced, but that's basically what they're doing. And they fit a full model with demographics and circadian rhythm, as well as how long they'd been awake. And then a model that's exactly the same, except they removed the demographics. Now, normally, when I fit a model, I would do the opposite. I would have demographics in both models, but the full would only include the circadian rhythm and the time awake. And my rationale for doing that is I'm doing a theoretically meaningful model comparison. Like, demographics are just nuisance variables that I don't care about. I just want to control for them. My variables of interest are the time-based variables. And so I can ask myself a theoretical question. What do these time variables add above and beyond a person's baseline characteristics? To me, that's a more theoretically meaningful model comparison to do, whereas theirs feels more prediction-oriented than theory-oriented. And why do I say that? I guess it's based on their conclusions, because they looked at the model comparison and said, well, it didn't seem like the demographics are adding much, so I'm just going to get rid of them. That's a very prediction-oriented rationale, rather than my approach, which would be much more theory-oriented. So overall, coolest things about the paper: super high ecological validity, super high sample size, Very clever method of handling the time variable in such a way that I'd never seen before. And it gives these beautiful plots with these sinusoidal patterns, which I think is just awesome. Oh, you know what else I thought about? I may regret saying this because I feel like I'm signing myself up to do this very thing. But because they have so many time points per person, I would suspect there's going to be a whole lot of autocorrelation going on. That people's scores on day 2 are going to be correlated with their scores on day 1. And the way that it's handled in the mixed model isn't all that intentional. I would like to see probably the residuals fit with some sort of a time series analysis. So what LME is going to do in the background is it's going to assume that the residuals are conditionally independent given the random effects, which that's probably not very realistic. Again, for the reason that, you know, my mood today is probably going to be influenced by my mood yesterday. And not to mention that, but, you know, stress accumulates, a lack of sleep accumulates, and if you have any sort of accumulation, then the standard way of handling the residuals isn't going to work very well. Whether that actually makes a difference, I don't know. It might not make a difference at all. Who knows? But all right, back to my critique. So again, ecological validity, awesome. Sample size, awesome. The way they handled the time variables, totally cool, with the exception of maybe the residuals. And my biggest criticisms are really kind of two different manifestations of the same thing. One is it seems that they probably fit models where they categorized a continuous variable, which introduced unreliability. And two, they also discretized or categorized a continuous variable and then ran separate mixed models for each of those 4 bins, which is certainly an inefficient way of doing things. And I definitely wouldn't do that. I wouldn't fit 4 separate models like that. Instead, I would rather evaluate all the data at once instead of treating them as if they're independent data sets when they're not. So yeah, kudos to... Who are you? Shapiro, Fang, Sen, and Forger. Yeah, nicely done. Keep up the good work. And hey, this is timely because guess what? At the beginning of June, I am going to be teaching a mixed models class. So if you want to beef up your mixed modeling skills, then I invite you to see the link in the description. Check it out. It's going to be awesome. So hopefully that's been helpful, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.